Hello, welcome to a series of lectures on Shakespeare's Hamlet. There'll be 12 lectures, and this is the first. If you watch all 12 lectures, you get an extra credit point. You earn one. And you can watch these lectures during regular class hours if you like, or at your own convenience. So let's see. The text that we'll be using, remember, the Norton Anthology. This is what I'll use for the lectures. But you're also welcome to use the No Fear Shakespeare if you prefer. We'll also be using the writer's reference on occasion. All right. And let's see, what else? What's next on my list here of things to discuss today? The handouts. If you've got copies of the handouts, that's great. If not, they're on Canvas. You can access them through the files box. And let's see. I guess we should just go through these handouts. Let's start with the final essay handout on Hamlet. That's this handout here. All right. And this is worth 12 points, your final essay. And here you have the assignment. Again, you're going to have three options. Option A, write an analytical essay on the theme of the several deterministic causes behind the protagonist's delay in seeking vengeance in Hamlet by focusing on three specific internal or external factors for the hero's inability to obey the ghost's demand. So this is the primary topic, primary thesis that we'll be looking at in class. But I'll also mention other possible topics. If you're interested in option B, you can write an analytical essay on any element of drama from the play, such as character, plot, setting, symbolism, imagery, or theme. And for option C, for those of you who'd like to write an argumentative essay, you're welcome to do that as well on a controversial issue that the play raises. Remember, for options B and C, you need to submit a working thesis and an outline in advance for approval. The requirements, I'm just going down the page here. The requirements for the assignment, the primary source we'll be using, of course, is Hamlet. The secondary sources we'll be using, I'll require this time a minimum of 3 secondary sources. These can be either books, library database articles, or film adaptations. The style sheet, again, is Modern Language Association, MLA. I prefer Times New Roman font. The print is 12-point size. Use black ink, please. The length, once again, is a minimum of 1,500 words or 5 pages, and that doesn't include the works cited page. And the final essay will be due the last day of class, which is Monday, May 11th. Now, you can also earn an extra credit point if you have a draft of your essay reviewed by a writing instructor in the A Center. You can do this online. And just inform me of that when you email this final assignment to me through Canvas by the due date. All right, so that takes care of the general requirements for the assignment. If you notice on the second page, once again, I've got the basic structure here of a literary analysis. And make sure you follow this general outline here when you're writing your essay. And on pages 3 through 7, this is you've seen all of this information before when we studied A Midsummer Night's Dream. This is all of the information you need to write an essay, and this is exactly how I'm going to evaluate your essay. Remember, no surprises, and I took all of this information from the Norton Anthology, and I've given you the chapters at the top of the page here. So the first section I'll be evaluating your essay on is the content. That's on page 3. And then the second section on page 4 is the rhetoric. And the third section is on page 5 and page 6, the ABCs of communication. Remember, I'm giving extra credit For the best content in the class, extra credit point. You can earn an extra credit point for the best content. Also, under rhetoric, for the best title, there's an extra credit point. The best lead and the best closing, an extra credit point each. And then finally, an extra credit point for the fewest errors in the communication skills. All this extra credit, I'll just notify you when I, put your grades in Canvas. Let's see, what else? Oh, I'm thinking, yeah, let's also open the chat room on Canvas. I'll be available to chat on Mondays and Wednesdays during my office hours. That's from 10 to 11:30. So we can chat about the lectures that I'm presenting here, or we can talk about your essay, problems you're having with your essay, questions you have. So I'll keep that chat room open on those days, Mondays and Wednesdays during my office hours. I don't know, did I mention you can watch these lectures during regular class hours on Mondays and Wednesdays, or you can watch them at your convenience? I'll try to put them up as quickly and as efficiently as I can. So you check your Canvas box. I'll put check the announcements in your Canvas, and I'll let you know when new lectures are coming up and so forth. All right, let's see. What else do I need to mention here? Oh yes, in your essay packet, page 7. Here I've given you the 3 ways you can cite the play. These are the 3 examples here for citing anything from Hamlet. So use this page, use these examples when you cite from the text. All right, so that takes care of the final essay assignment. Let's turn next to the final journal assignment. This assignment is worth 6 points. And I'm going to change the due date on this. Let's make this the last day of class also. So the new due date for the final journal on Hamlet will be Monday, May 11th. And let's look at this handout, the directions here. You've seen this before. For the first 5 entries, journal entries corresponded to the 5 acts in Shakespeare's play. And for each of these entries, just follow the exercises listed here. These questions and exercises have been tailored to help you write an essay for option A. Give me a full page for each of these entries and you get full credit. And remember, the journal's for you to explore ideas for your essay. I'll also, you can earn an extra credit point for the journal assignment. If you look at exercise 5, you get the list of literary devices, which we discussed. If you choose any 4 of those devices and explain what the device is, right? What is a metaphor, for example? And then give me an example from the play, from Hamlet, and then explain why the play, how that metaphor is operating. Why is that metaphor being used? What does it reveal about the speaker's thoughts or feelings or behavior? So choose any 4 from the list here of literary devices, and you can earn an extra credit point. Now for the 6th entry in the journal assignment, that's on the back of this page, this is where I would like you to watch one of the film adaptations of the play. I've got 5 film adaptations listed here at the bottom of the page. And you can choose any one of the 5. You should be able to access any of these online, and then write your 1-page critique, where you either recommend the movie to your peers or not. And I think you're familiar with the film critique also. that shouldn't be difficult for you. All right, that takes care of the second assignment, the final journal. Let's turn to the third final assignment, the final exam for Hamlet. So turn to that handout, and that too is worth 6 points, like the journal. So remember, the journal and the exam, each is worth 6 points. So they're combined, they're acting like one, right, 12-point assignment. And this again is the take-home exam, of course. I'm going to change the due date. So make a note to yourself. This is now due on Monday, May the 11th, which is the final day of the semester. So again, I'm giving you an extra weekend to work on this. Let's see. So the directions. Here are the directions for the final exam. You've got a list of concepts here. There are 13 concepts, which I will discuss in class. Some of them we've seen before, but Shakespeare, these ideas are important to Shakespeare, and he explores them. Each time he looks at them, though, he's continuously, or I should say the play, remember, the play is continuously looking at these ideas from a different angle, from a different perspective, sort of like a kaleidoscope, you know, and you turn the handle on the kaleidoscope, you see a different series of patterns within. And so if you look, for example, at the 6th or 7th concept listed here, the problem of knowing the other mind, you're all familiar with this concept. Shakespeare's going to explore it again. He's going to look at it, as I said earlier, in a new way. So some of these concepts you'll be familiar with. But all you need to do is choose 6 of those 13 concepts and explain them in your own words, and you earn 6 points. And I'll give an extra credit point. Well, I won't give it away. You have to earn it. An extra credit point if you choose a 7th concept and explain that to me. All right, so those are the 3 final assignments. They're all due the last day of the semester, which is Monday, May the 11th. So between now and then, I'll be putting up these 12 lectures on Hamlet, and I'll be in the chat room during my office hours on Mondays and Wednesdays from 10 to 11:30. And of course, you can email me through Canvas if you have, at other times, if you have questions or concerns. Keep in touch with me. And I'll use the announcement board in Canvas to put up any updates. Let's see what else. Yeah, that's enough for now. Also, the study guide. Remember, the study guide is optional. I passed these out in class on the day before we went off to spring break, that last Wednesday. If you don't have a copy of the study guide, you can access any study guide online for Hamlet should suffice. But the study guide is optional. Some students appreciate the study guide. It helps them to understand the play better. So feel free to use the study guide. Oh, yes, also, I forgot, extra credit assignments. Once again, I'll be, in addition to the extra credit assignments for these major required assignments, I'll be offering extra credit for the controversial issues that the play will be raising. And again, you can send me your responses through Canvas, and I'll record the extra credit for you. All right. Let's see what's next. I think I've covered all of that. So, well, let's begin then. Let's just here on the board, my makeshift board here, let's recall that whenever human beings tell stories, we can enter storybook land on the axes of art. And any story that we read or hear can be plotted somewhere on this graph, somewhere on the vertical axis and somewhere on the horizontal axis. These are known as the axes of art. And if you recall, On the vertical axis here, you've got the different worldviews, the opposing worldviews. So at the top of the axis, you have what's known as the romantic view of the world. This is how people view the world if they're romantics. Uh, and I contended that most people are romantics. There are three characteristics that you need to understand for studying Hamlet when it comes to the romantic view of the world. The first is the notion that the universe has meaning or purpose, some sort of goal that it's moving toward, a plan, a design. Um, Romantics may not know what that purpose is, but nevertheless, they do believe that the universe has a purpose, has a reason for existing. And you can think of that purpose as being created by the universe itself, if you're thinking along uh, non traditional uh, lines. The universe itself is a kind of, it is a conscious, I don't quite, yeah, it's a conscious, intelligent entity that has designed itself and ultimately is moving towards some final destination or purpose. Or you can think in traditionally religious. You could have a traditionally religious understanding that the universe was created by a god or gods, and with a reason in mind, with a purpose in mind. Um, and so I guess that brings us to our second characteristic of the romantic view, which is the idea that there's a natural world, the world that human beings exist in, and a world that's subject to the laws of uh, physics. But in addition to this natural world, there's a supernatural world, a world that's above and beyond human understanding. And the supernatural world can actually interfere with or impose upon the natural world. And so we can have the laws of nature temporarily suspended or even broken. We can have such things as miracles according to the romantic, magic, and the supernatural world can be populated by all kinds of entities, supernatural entities like gods or demons or devils, fairies. You recall from A Midsummer Night's Dream, angels, uh, witches, ghosts, as we'll see in Hamlet. And they're also the supernatural realm, according to many people's beliefs, many romantics' beliefs. There are places in that realm called paradises or heavens, and also places called hell. Uh, and of course, there's all kinds of miraculous occurrences in the natural world, or ultimately can be traced back to the supernatural intervention. So that leads to this third characteristic of the romantic view, and that is the idea that there's some sort of moral order operating in the universe. Uh, Again, I've said before that many romantics view the universe as they imagine a great war going on between forces of good and the forces of evil. And that ultimately, in the end, the forces of good will triumph over the forces of evil. Evil will somehow be contained or annihilated, done away with, and in the end, good will be the victor and will ultimately succeed in destroying evil. So think of those three characteristics when you think of the Romantic worldview as we study Hamlet. The first is this idea that the universe does have a meaning, it does have a purpose, a design, or a plan. Second, that there is a supernatural world world in addition to the natural world. And finally, that there is a moral order operating in the universe. Now, in contrast, and of course, the Romantic view is the view of faith. Uh, Again, that faith can be religious faith, or traditionally speaking, it could be religious faith, or non-traditionally speaking, it can be spiritual faith. And in contrast to the Romantic view, at the opposite end of the vertical axis, we have the realistic worldview. And for our purpose, again, the three characteristics you need to understand is, number one, first, the universe does not have a meaning for existing, a purpose. There's no plan, there's no goal, no design. It's not moving toward any sort of ultimate end. It just is. Existence just is. It's a brute force. It's unconscious. It's unintelligent because it isn't an entity. The universe is simply a force. Remember, we talked about in the realistic worldview, the universe is simply space and energy and matter bits colliding. The energy bits colliding with the matter bits, and the matter bits colliding with each other. And that leads to the complexities that we see in the universe. It begins with these simple interactions between energy and matter bits, but it isn't conscious. The universe isn't conscious. It isn't intelligent. It's simply an unfolding process with no goal and no design, no end, no purpose. And so that leads to the second trait, which is the idea that the natural world is the only world that exists, that there is no supernatural realm in addition to the natural world, that the natural world operates according to the laws of physics, and that those laws can't be broken. Uh, they can't be interfered with in any way. There's an inevitability that these laws ultimately dictate. And then finally, the third trait, the third characteristic of the realistic worldview is the idea that there is no moral order operating in the universe. There's no great battle being engaged in, that two great forces, opposite forces, good and evil, are engaging in. There's no war going on between these opposing forces. The universe, again, as a conscious and unintelligent process, is simply the irony is that it led to this complexity, led to us and other conscious sentient beings, but it really has, not being conscious or intelligent, it really has no interest in us or in what happens to us. So the realistic view, in contrast to faith, is based on reason, and these. So you understand that faith and reason are opposite each other. They're faith is the antithesis, if you will, of reason. It's the opposite of it. Faith is holding a belief without evidence, with zero evidence, no proof, whereas reason is holding a belief with evidence that can be demonstrated to be true beyond a rational doubt. So faith is based on scientific observation and the philosophical truths that scientific the scientific data, the scientific facts ultimately reveal. What I've been calling the most important truths. So that takes care of the vertical axis, the romantic versus the realistic worldview, how people tend to see the world. Now let's look at the horizontal axis, And if you think of the vertical axis as a kind of vision of the world, the universe that we inhabit, you can think of the horizontal axis as the story, the plot line of the story that human beings tell themselves, the human story that human beings subscribe to, if you will. So on the right hand side here is the comic plot line. And for our purposes, again, you need to understand three major characteristics. And first is the comic plot line that characters in a comedy and you and me in the real world that we're living out a story, and yes, there are obstacles, there are problems and troubles along the way, uh, there's pain and suffering, but ultimately that pain and suffering, the obstacles can either be overcome, or the pain and suffering is ultimately worth the price. And there's this promise at the end of the story that there will be a happy ending. And many times there's the suggestion that the a happy ending will be forever, the happily ever after ending. You can think of, I think the analogy that works best is to think of if a person subscribes to the comic plot line, think of a maze and imagine that everyone running around in the maze. That yes, it can seem at times absurd, and you can be blocked toward getting the cheese that you desire that's hidden in the maze. And yes, there are rough edges; the corners are rough in the maze, and there are traps that you can step into. But that ultimately, there's a way to escape that maze. There's an exit, and on the other side of that exit, there is a mountain of cheese, if you will, waiting for everyone. That's the comic plot line. And so, that's the first characteristic. This happily ever after ending, this happy ending. Um, the second trait in a comic plot is the idea that I guess this idea that life is seen, existence is seen as having uh, the most important value. Existence is what matters most. Life is what matters most. And life is generally viewed as positive, of most value. And so that's the idea is that yes, don't. It's not that life is all good. It's not that life is all a bed of roses or all cotton candy and hearts and flowers and good times. But it's the idea that ultimately life is what matters. Existence matters. And so the third characteristic is the idea that since life matters, there's the suggestion that we, as a species, we should, the continuation of life, right, bringing new life into the world is promoted, is seen as positive. You get the idea of the circle of life, for example, that metaphor, the circle of life. So those are the three characteristics of the comic plot line. And again, most people subscribe to this story when it comes to human existence. At the opposite side of the comic plot is the tragic plot. And the tragic plot doesn't end happily. It ends, as I've said before, catastrophically. Uh, often in disintegration of social order, of uh, often madness, and certainly death. Um, that's not to say that in a tragic plot, again, that's not to say that existence doesn't have any as it does. There aren't aspects of existence that are good and that are positive. But overall, the idea is that the maze that we find ourselves in is ultimately one in which there's not going to be an exit. There isn't going to be an ending that's happy, and it's certainly not an ever after ending um, awaiting us, that there is no exit out of the maze, and that the traps that we find in the maze, all of the mouse traps within the maze, where ultimately the traps are going to get each and every one of us ultimately. There's no escape from the maze, and tragic plot. The story we tell ourselves it ends in death, and death is final. And the second characteristic is what is valued most is not existence. There's something that trumps that's more important than existence itself, than life itself, and that is the prevention of unnecessary harm. Harm, suffering is seen to have most value, or I should say, more value than life. Um, and preventing that suffering, if it can be prevented, is seen to be all important. And so the third that gives us the third characteristic of the tragic plot line, which is this idea that ultimately it's wrong because all lives end tragically and all lives are, uh, um, contain suffering and harm. Ultimately, we should not continue uh, bringing new beings into the world. That it's best for right the human species to end, to become extinct. I use the metaphor of thinking about we're thinking the person who subscribes to the tragic plot line imagines we're all on the Titanic and the Titanic is sinking. And yes, we can, as we're sinking, we can try to enjoy ourselves to the extent we can. We can party, have a good time, listen to music, have good food, but just face the truth, face the facts that the Titanic is sinking, and not to bring any more people onto the Titanic because it isn't necessary. And it would be unethical, irrational, and unethical to do so. So, every story we tell ourselves can be plotted somewhere on this graph, somewhere, right, on the vertical axis and somewhere on the horizontal axis. And turning to Hamlet, most most critics of the play and most Shakespearean scholars and most people in the audience, when they um, come away from Hamlet, they think of Hamlet as a romantic tragedy. So Hamlet is plotted somewhere here, right? It's a tragedy. The plot that unfolds is a tragic one. And the view of the world, right, is a romantic one. All the characters in the play, including Hamlet, of course, are romantics. All the major characters are romantics in the play. And so most everyone who experiences this play sees the play as a romantic tragedy. I'm going to argue a different interpretation. I'm going to say that it just appears to be a romantic tragedy, but in essence, the play is a realistic tragedy. So I'm going to say this is where my interpretation is going to fall. And I realize that it's a radical interpretation, but I believe that I can provide you with enough evidence uh, that can stand beyond a rational doubt so that you will see that the play is essentially a realistic tragedy. And while it may be true that the characters in the play see the world through a romantic lens, that's not the world that Shakespeare, by Shakespeare again, remember I'm using that as shorthand for Shakespeare's play Hamlet. The play Hamlet does not view the world through does not see the world through those rose-colored glasses. It looks at the play and presents us with a very realistic view of the world, despite how the characters, including Hamlet, imagine that world to be, that Hamletian world to be. They imagine it to be a romantic universe that they're all inhabiting. Um, let's see, what else did I want to say about that? I think that's enough. I hope I explained that well enough. This is uh, kind of new for me doing this on Canvas, but hopefully that explains it. If you have any questions on that, remember on Monday and Wednesday this week, I'll be in the chat room and we can talk about it in more detail if you like. So let's turn then to the essay assignment. Let's get started writing our essay. So turn back to your essay, the final essay handout here. And remember, I'm going to be discussing, primarily be focusing on option A. And this option is for those of you who, you know, don't have that much experience in reading Shakespeare, and maybe you're feeling a bit, nervous about it, or maybe you don't have that much experience writing analytical essays. So I would recommend option A for those of you with not as much experience under your belt. Shakespeare's Hamlet is a long play. I think it's the longest play he wrote. Don't quote me on that. You can Google it. Just remember, Google is evil. But yeah, I think it's the longest play. I know it's over 4,000 lines. And one of the film adaptations of the play, the Kenneth Branagh version, Kenneth Branagh directed and stars as Hamlet in that version. He didn't cut any lines from the play, I believe, and so the play runs over 4 hours. It's a big play, and there are a lot of ideas in this play, a lot of topics to explore. Don't let that frighten you. Don't let that confuse you, because we're going to focus for option A. We're just going to zero in on, we're just going to focus on this one particular thesis. So let's recall what a thesis is. The theme of the work, the theme of the play becomes the thesis of our essay. So the thesis is just a mathematical equation. It's just the thesis equals your topic plus your opinion on that topic. And you need to state that concisely, right, and precisely in one sentence. The thesis, the topic we're exploring. Remember, what are we writing about, Brussels sprout? The topic we'll be exploring for option A is, why does Hamlet delay in seeking vengeance for his father's death? That's the reason I've chosen that topic, Hamlet's delay in avenging his father's death, is because it's a topic that a lot of people are interested in, a lot of critics, a lot of scholars, and there's an enormous amount of research out there surrounding this problem of Hamlet's delay. Hamlet is not your stereotypical classical avenger. You know, the antique Romans and the ancient Greeks, these avengers, these were men of action, and these were men who were given a task, who were a mission of vengeance, and went about their business seeking revenge. The only obstacles that confronted them were, external obstacles in the world that prevented them. Right? That's what develops the story. The obstacles that are preventing them from fulfilling their mission of revenge. Hamlet is not that classical avenger. Hamlet is given this task of a revenge, and he delays. And he delays for over 4,000 lines. And the question is why? Why does he delay? Why doesn't he simply fulfill his mission, his task, and obey the ghost's commandment to avenge his father's death? So that's the topic we'll focus on. And the opinion that we're going to be looking at on that topic, what do we think right? What are we writing about, Brussels sprout, and what do we think, tiddlywink? Well, I'm going to be arguing that Hamlet's delay, let's not look for one particular cause. I'm not interested in looking at one tragic flaw, so to speak, although probably it could be reduced to this idea of irrationality. But I'm going to make the argument that what causes Hamlet's delay is several deterministic factors. There are several internal as well as external obstacles that cause Hamlet to delay. And that's what I'll be discussing throughout the lectures. I'll be looking at these causal factors individually. And you're welcome. Remember, for your essay map, tell me why puddin' pie, right? To explain the opinion on your thesis, I'm asking you to choose any three of the causes we explore in the lectures, or you can choose your own cause if you come across one that we don't discuss. I'm certainly not going to touch on all the causes. But I will, like we did with the Midsummer Night's Dream, I'll touch on about 7 or 8 or maybe 9 or 10 causes behind Hamlet's delay. And you can choose any three to explore, any three that we discuss, or as I said, you can choose 1, 2, or 3 factors that you yourself discover in analyzing the play. The second point about the thesis I'd like to underscore is that these causes are deterministic. So that brings up again this idea. Once again, it brings up this idea of determinism. Remember, for the realists in the world, the universe is a great machine. It's clockwork. It's a mechanical process that's unfolding. And the law of causality operates throughout the universe. So you have the argument that's made by the realist. Remember the major premise. I won't take the time to write this on the board. You can just pause here and rewind if you need to. But the major premise, how the argument goes, what the realist argues is that the major premise is that everything that exists within the universe, and that includes human beings, we exist within the universe. So everything that exists within the universe and everything that occurs within the universe, and so that includes every thought that we human beings have, every emotion that we feel, every sensation we experience, uh, uh, every action that we perform, uh, everything that exists within the universe and everything that occurs within the universe has a totality of causes. There are causes behind all of these things that exist and all of these things that occur within the universe. We may not know what the totality of causes are, but you can bet your bottom dollar that they're there. The minor premise is that causes make their effects inevitable. So there's only inevitability in the universe. So let me try to think of an analogy here. If you take, all right, let's say you take a pair of dice and you throw them. How they land, let's say the dice land snake eyes, a 1 and a 1. How they land is determined by the factors, the variables that go into that particular toss. Now, we don't know all of the factors that go into that particular toss. So, but if we did know the factors, we could predict ahead of time that the dice would land on snake eyes. If we knew, for example, the speed at which we threw the dice and the height we threw them and the angle we tossed them at and the direction and the kind of surface that it hit and the angle it hit the surface and how it landed, what kind of surface it landed on, just a host of variables, and we can't know all of these variables. But if we did, if we knew all of the factors, we would know before we even threw the dice, we would know that it would land snake eyes. Inevitability is part and parcel. It is the universe. This inevitability is what governs the universe. It's the law of causality. The only, I guess you would say that there, in other words, there's no such thing in the universe as luck, as chance, or as randomness. That we use these words because we don't know all of the factors, all of the variables. But if we did, we could plug those variables into a mathematical formula and we could determine in advance exactly what would happen when we threw the pair of dice. But because we can't know all of the factors, we can only think in terms of probability. But again, probability doesn't exist in the universe. It's only because we can't see the future. We can't predict the inevitability that probability arises, that this idea of chance and luck and randomness occurs because we can't see it. We can't see all of the factors, the totality of causes, but that in reality, chance doesn't exist. Our ancestors used words like chance and randomness and luck, but they were using them in, the pre-scientific age, the pre-modern period, and now we understand the law of causality. So the law of causality is based on scientific observation. So if you take the major and the minor premise, let me give you those again. That the major premise that everything that occurs everything that exists or occurs within the universe has a totality of causes. And the minor premise, causes make their effects inevitable. Then you conclude that everything that exists or occurs in the universe is inevitable. That's known as determinism. And in the world of determinism, there's no chance for chance, no luck. There's no freedom. There's no free will. None of us is in control. We are part of the universe, which is one great big machine. We are part of that machine. We ourselves are machines. We ourselves are mechanical. We are robots, right? I think I've used the metaphor before that our brains are like computers. They're our central processing unit, and they are programmed by our experiences, to some extent by our genetics, but mostly by our experiences. And so there is no such thing as probability in the universe. There's only inevitability. But since we can't see the future, we have to think in terms of probability. So Hamlet's story, what happens in Hamlet, in the play Hamlet, his story, what happens to Hamlet and to all the characters in the story, that's already determined before the story even begins, before the script is even written. It's already determined what's going to be the outcome, what the end is going to be. There's no room for freedom, for free will. Remember, the concept of free will is a romantic view of the world, and there's simply no evidence, zero evidence to support, there's no proof to support that human beings have this mysterious kind of freedom that is somehow removed and divorced from the law of causality. So Hamlet's story is already written. It's already determined before it even begins. Just as our stories, your story and my story, how each of us is going, all of the experiences that we're going to have in life, and how each of us is going to die, that's already determined, and you can't change it. You don't have control. You don't have freedom according to the realistic view of the world. And remember, that view is based on evidence beyond a rational doubt. All the scientific evidence and all the philosophical truths that are revealed by that scientific evidence point to determinism. And it says that we know how each, or it's already determined rather, how you and I, how each of us is going to die. Can't change it. Nothing you can do about it. It's already, the script is already written. But part of that deterministic script is human intelligence, right? We human beings are part of the deterministic process, and we have something called intelligence, this ability to conceptualize, to, right, to actually see various future scenarios, to imagine them, to imagine different scenarios unfolding. And so we can think in terms of probabilities. This is how probability theory arises in mathematics, because we can't see the future, so we can only think about the future in terms of probability. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you and I are taking a walk, and suddenly I collapse on the sidewalk. And you, let's imagine you're a realist and a determinist, therefore. And being a determinist, you say, well, Mr. Starkey's already told me. Here he has collapsed on the sidewalk. It could be a heart attack. If it's a heart attack, he's already told me. It's determined. It's already written. It's in the script that he'll either die from this heart attack or he won't die from it. So I have no control here. There's nothing I can do in a deterministic universe. I'm just a robot, part of the machinery, part of the unfolding process, part of the clockwork mechanics here. And Mr. Starkey's either going to die or he's not going to die. It's already determined. So I guess I'll just sit back and wait and watch and see what happens. Well, if you were to think that way, I would argue that you're poorly programmed. Your brain has been badly programmed because you don't know what is going to happen. You do know that either I will die or I won't die, that either it's a heart attack and the heart attack will be fatal, or it's not a heart attack, or the heart attack won't be fatal, right? But you don't know. You don't see the future. You can only imagine these various scenarios. What you do know are probabilities. You have experiences in your life that can tell you that if you act a certain way, once I collapse on the sidewalk, if you behave in a certain way, that the chances of my not dying, or the probabilities, will be greater, that I will not die if you behave in a certain way. That's still no guarantee, because it's inevitable, but you can act, and you can act on probability. So let me explain what I mean. So you have a cell phone in your hand, and you know all about cell phones from your experiences in life. And you also know that there's a number called 911. That's an emergency number. And you know about emergency medical technicians and ambulances. And you've heard of hospitals and doctors and nurses. And you've heard about people who've had heart attacks and survived these heart attacks because they were rushed to hospitals using all of these means. So you have this information. It's part of your intelligence that you have acquired through determinism, through your experiences in life. And you can't see the future. Now, you can think along the lines, you know that if you act on this knowledge that you've attained, that probabilities, right? The probability that I will survive are greater. If you just sit back and say, well, either he's going to die or not, it's inevitable, that's a fact. So I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to use my cell phone. I'm not going to dial 911. I'm not going to call for an ambulance. I'm not going to have Mr. Starkey rush to a hospital and have doctors and nurses treat him. Well, the probabilities, if it is a heart attack, the probabilities that I will die are suddenly greater. So you can see that our intelligence is part of the deterministic process. So we act on probabilities. even though it's already decided, it's already determined, it's already inevitable what is going to occur. I mean, you could call 911 and get the ambulance and get me to the hospital and have the best doctors and the best nurses and the best attendants, and I could still die from the heart attack. Or I could die in the ambulance drive on the way. We could, in a fiery car crash. Right? It's already written, it's already inevitable, but you can't see the inevitability. All you can act on is your knowledge, what you've acquired, your experience. Uh, to give one more brief illustration, remember if there's a war against Hitler, you can't be like Homer Simpson and sit back on the couch and say, well, Hitler's either going to win the war or lose the war. Nothing I do can help that. It's inevitable. So I'm just going to sit back on the couch and eat my potato chips and drink my beer. Or you can say the probability that Hitler will lose the war will be greater if I get up and contribute to the cause against Hitler. But if everybody sits on the couch, the probability that Hitler will win the war, right, will become higher, will be greater. But it's already written whether Hitler's going to win the war or not. It's already determined. So Hamlet's story is already determined. His story is a tragic one. It ends tragically. Hamlet himself is programmed by his, remember we talked about how each of us is programmed. We're to some extent, again, by heredity, by our genetics, but mostly by our experiences, by our biological drives, by our psychological desires, and by our cultural dependencies. It's our experiences and the situations that we find ourselves in that produce, that program us into either good or bad robots. Highly good robots are highly functioning robots, bad robots, right, are badly, poorly functioning robots. I'm going to argue that Hamlet is a really bad robot. He's a big jackass. Remember Bottom from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Hamlet is poorly programmed. And his tragedy is that no one within the Hamletian world, within the world of Hamlet, within the world of the play, there's no Shakespeare within that world, within Hamlet's world, that can have an impact on Hamlet, that can program him, right? That can program him in a better way. Remember, I said, think about how each of us is programmed. And I think I used, what was the analogy I used? Think of each of us as a satellite. Think of us as think of yourself as the surface of the moon, a newly born moon, and the surface is smooth. And how do you become who you become in life? Well, it's the craters that hit the moon. It's the asteroids, it's the comets, it's the other cosmic debris that impacts, that collides with the moon, that shapes the surface, the smooth surface of the moon, that gives its valleys and its mountains and its vast deserts. And that's what shapes us, our experiences in life. That's what programs us, and that's what determines who we are. And what has determined Hamlet, who he is, this poorly programmed robot, is the experience. The experiences in his life are responsible. Hamlet himself is not responsible. He's not responsible for his own tragedy or for the tragedy of those around him, but he causes a lot of harm, a lot of grief, because he is so poorly programmed. And though he's not responsible, it's still a fact, an inescapable truth, that he's a big jackass. That's still a fact, even though he isn't responsible for being that. And I think probably one of the most significant ironies in the play, yes, the deeply significant irony in this play is that Hamlet longs to be a man of integrity. He wants to be someone who is intellectually honest to himself and to others. and who is ethically decent. He wants to be a, a, as little a jackass as he can be in the world. That's what he longs and wants more than anything. That's what I think he desires more than anything. But it's simply not going to be. It's not determined to be. He is a prisoner of Denmark. It's a great line from the play. Hamlet says that he's a prisoner of Denmark, and Denmark here he's a prisoner of the world. Denmark here representing the universe. We're all prisoners. We're all contained within the deterministic walls. It's a deterministic prison. We each of us finds ourselves in. And the walls are constructed by our experiences, by the situations, the ever occurring situations and the experiences, the ever arising experiences throughout our lives. That's what constructs the walls. And remember, we've got these biological drives and we've got these psychological desires and these cultural dependencies, these cultural addictions that unfortunately get in the way of our ability to reason, to be rational. And that's what happens with Hamlet, I would argue. That's why I said if I were to think of a tragic flaw ultimately, is that Hamlet thinks irrationally about his world and about his place in that world. His thinking is irrational, and it leads to all kinds of unethical uh, behavior. It produces all kinds of unnecessary harm and suffering to himself and to those around him. Um, yeah, that's probably, I think, the most significant irony in the play is that it's not at all what Hamlet wishes for, what he wants. And remember, I've made the argument that Shakespeare's plays, and I've read quite a few of Shakespeare's plays, but if I were to sum up Shakespeare, uh, if he were to offer us how we should go about conducting ourselves, I think, in a nutshell, Shakespeare in a nutshell would be first, do no harm to our ability to reason, to be rational, to try to understand where we are and what we are as accurately as we can, to try to get an accurate model of the reality around us, to try to get an accurate a model of that reality as we can. That's the first and most important, right, function of what it means to be a human being, is to get that accurate model of reality, to understand what the scientific facts are and what the philosophical truths that are revealed by those facts are, those most important truths. If we use our ability, our human skill, he calls it, remember in A Midsummer Night's Dream, touching now the point of human skill, if we use our human skill, our ability to reason, then we can develop a rational, sound code of ethics, a way to conduct ourselves, how to live our lives, how to best function in the world, how to be as little a jackass as we can. And we will discover that what's most important, what we should be doing, is we should be doing what's of most value is we should be out there in the world trying to prevent unnecessary harm to feeling conscious organisms, to sentient organisms that can suffer. And if we can't prevent the pain, the unnecessary harm, then we should do our best to reduce that pain, reduce that harm. That, is how to ultimately conduct ourselves. And I mean, you can think of it in terms of the life of a superhero with that knowledge, with that great responsibility, that great power comes that great responsibility. With the knowledge that we attain through our ability to reason, with understanding the scientific data, what we observe about the world around us, and adding that data together to come to these, to arrive to to arrive at these philosophical truths. You could see that as the role, right? That puts you in the position of the superhero, who, the life of a superhero is not one to, I would argue, to be particularly envious of. You've got this great power and you've got this great responsibility. You can't, you know, it can't be about your happiness and your contentment. It can't be, about you. If you're Superman, it can't be about you and Lois Lane. That can't be what life is about. It's got to be about you, Superman, putting on the tights and going out and preventing the right, preventing the busload of people from crashing and burning. So that's the task. That's what we need to become, right? To become these alpha thinkers. I think I've used that metaphor too. Hamlet is not an alpha thinker. That's a problem. He wants to be one, but the standards are rather high to become an alpha thinker. You've got to overcome these, this notion that life is about your happiness and the pursuit of your pleasure and your gains. So, anyway, enough of that. That's the thesis we'll be exploring, that there are several deterministic factors that ultimately cause Hamlet to delay in avenging his father's death. And you, for your essay map, are to choose three of those factors. Tell me why, pudding pie. And then during the lectures, what I'll be doing is going through and listing a number of these factors and providing evidence from the text. That's the fourth question, for you to provide evidence for each of the reasons for each of the deterministic factors. You're to explain what you mean, Jelly Bean. Remember, you're from the show me stage, so you got to show me. You can't just tell me. You've got to provide that scientific evidence from the text, and you've got to analyze that evidence and point out how that evidence supports your reasoning and how that reasoning ultimately supports your opinion on that topic of yours, ultimately supports your thesis. So just a few more minutes. I just want to end this lecture with turning to the text itself. So turn in your anthologies to page 1396. And at the top of the page, you find the title of the play, Hamlet, your list of characters, the opening scene. This is Act 1, Scene 1. And I like to begin Hamlet with my favorite knock-knock joke. You all know how knock-knock jokes go. I say knock-knock, and you say, who's there? And then I respond with the joke. So let's see if we can do this online. I'll begin. Knock, knock. Did I hear you? I'll try it again. Knock, knock. Nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. That's a great joke. That's a great joke. I'm alluding to, of course, the opening lines in Hamlet. If you turn and look at the opening lines between the two guards, Bernardo and Francisco, Bernardo is the guard who's coming on duty. They're guarding the castle. Francisco is the guard who's on duty. And Bernardo, as he approaches, calls out, who's there? And Francisco responds, nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. This knock-knock joke, I think you could use this when you go out on a blind date with a potential honey bunny. When you sit down to dinner, I think that's the first thing you should introduce yourself with the knock-knock joke. You can say, knock, knock, and your potential honey bunny will say, who's there? And then you can respond, nay, answer me. stand and unfold yourself. And if the potential honey bunny says, what? Say what? Well, you know right then and there what to do. You need to stand up and wait for the waiter and ask for the check. And then you need to run as fast as your feet can carry you and as far away as you can possibly get. Run from that potential honey bunny, because you do not want to spend possibly the rest of your life with someone who doesn't understand that knock-knock joke, who doesn't catch the allusion to the play Hamlet. You don't want to spend the rest of your life with someone who hasn't read or seen Hamlet, who hasn't studied it, analyzed it, thought about it in depth. Trust me, you don't want to do that. You want to spend your life with an alpha thinker. So keep that in mind on every blind date you go on in the future. So what's Shakespeare doing here at the beginning of this play? Who's there? Nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. Well, first, he's creating a tone. He's creating an atmosphere. The guard who's coming on duty cries out, who's there? But remember, military protocol, it's the guard who's on duty. The guard who's on duty, in this case Francisco, who should call out to anyone approaching the castle. The guard on duty calls out, who's there? That's the protocol. Bernardo is not following, right, the military rules. He's crying out, who's there? And Francisco reminds him, nay, you answer me. You need to stand. You need to stop and unfold yourself. Tell me who you are. You're the one coming on duty. You're the one approaching the castle. You need to remember what the rules are. And Bernardo has forgotten the rules. Why has he forgotten the rules? Well, he's nervous. He's tense. He's excited. Because Bernardo has seen a ghost the night before. He's seen a ghost. And so he's walking in the dark, and he's arriving, he's going on duty, and he's alert and fearful and jumpy. And that's why he cries out, who's there? He hears something perhaps, or sees something perhaps in the dark, and he thinks it's perhaps the ghost come again. And that's why he cries out. So Shakespeare is creating this tone in these opening lines, a tone of suspense. And he's also creating confusion. The world of Hamlet, the Hamletian world, is a world of chaos and confusion. It's a world where people suspect one another, where people want to know what others are thinking, what's going on in their heads and their brains, but they don't have access to the others' thoughts and feelings, to why they're behaving the way they're behaving. And this brings up a second reason I think Shakespeare introduces these lines here, and that is he's raising this issue again, this problem of knowing the other mind. And we've seen this problem in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And the problem is that we don't. None of us has access to somebody else's thoughts, to somebody else's thinking or feelings, to why somebody is behaving the way he or she is behaving, to what's motivating that person. So the characters in the play, in particular, Hamlet wants to know about what's motivating all the other characters in the play. He wants to know who's there. And the other characters are wanting to know what's going on in Hamlet's mind, and that includes us in the audience. We in the audience want to know in particular, what is Hamlet thinking? Why is he delaying in seeking vengeance? We want to know who's there. Who's there, Hamlet? What's going on in your head? What are you feeling? What are you sensing? What are your thoughts? Why are you behaving the way you're behaving? Who's there? We want to know. And it's a problem for us. It's a problem for the critics. It's a problem for the scholars. And it's a problem for you and me trying to understand, trying to fathom what's going on in Hamlet's brain. Then finally, I think it's Shakespeare, and most importantly, it's Shakespeare trying to